Hey, good morning. It's John from the Landlord Protection Agency. I hope you're having a great day so far. I want to talk to you about 9 essential lease clauses. I don't know how familiar you are with rental leases, but I've got 9 lease clauses that I'd like to share with you. And I'm going to do this Facebook Live in a couple of different presentations. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to follow them, and I'm hoping that you have a lease that contains these clauses. That's very important, The LPA lease on my website, the Landlord Protection Agency, has a ton of very important Landlord Protection Agency clauses. So I want you to be aware of those. And in this session, I'm going to share 3 of them, and I'm going to do 3 segments. So these Facebook Lives don't go too long. I know it can get kind of long if I really dive into it and get into some of this stuff. Well, you know how important it is to have a lease agreement as a landlord. And there are lots of different types of lease agreements. But the important thing is if you're a property owner and you're renting out to tenants, things can go pretty difficult with rentals to tenants. So it's very important to have a landlord lease, a lease agreement written to protect the landlord. And that's what my lease is all about, the Landlord Protection Agency lease agreement. So let me get into some of these clauses. One of the first very important clauses that I feel you should have in your lease is your late fee clause, when the rent is to be paid and when the rent is deemed late. It's very important because you cannot charge lease penalties. You cannot charge late fees to a tenant legally unless it's agreed to first in your lease agreement. You know that, right? Well, that's really important. So that's one of the essential clauses in a good landlord lease agreement is the late fee clause. Now, what we usually do is we charge a late fee. We give a grace period from the 1st to the 5th of the month. That's what we like to do. Some landlords don't agree with that. They feel the rent is due on the 1st of the month, and that's when the rent should be paid. If it's paid on the 2nd, they charge a late fee. We don't do that. We give them a little bit of a grace period, usually to the 5th of the month, and then we hit them with a late charge. And then we go a little further than that because we found by charging a late fee, the tenant might incur the late charge and be like, oh, well, we owe the late fee. We'll pay the rent with the late fee, but it'll take us a little more because it won't be comfortable coming up with it now. So we'll pay the late fee and the rent at the end of the month. Have you ever had that happen if you're a landlord? Well, we found that to be a common thing with a lot of tenants in all different areas, and it was happening to us years and years ago. So I decided we need a daily late fee in addition to the initial late fee. So in our lease, it also includes a daily late charge. And it could be anything you want it to be. But of course, remember, if you ever have to enforce late fees in court, you'll have a judge deciding whether you're reasonable or not to the tenants. So always make those daily late charges reasonable. And we started out making them only $5 a day. I think most of our leases now are either $10 or $20 a day after the late charge is incurred. So that's what we do. It gives the tenant the incentive to hurry up and pay that late fee. It's very important because if you don't give them an incentive to pay the rent on time by enforcing the late charge, or the incentive to hurry up and pay the rent with the late charge, then they're going to take their time. So it's very important that you, as the owner, get your rent in time because you have expenses on the property, and you may have a mortgage payment, taxes and insurance and other expenses that you depend on that rent for. So enforce your lease, enforce the late charge. And we've got the forms on the LPA to enforce these things, the late notice, the late fee notice, and all the different lease enforcement types of forms. So that's the late fee clause with the daily late charge. That's very important. So that's one of my essential clauses. Anyone have questions about these things, please don't hesitate to ask. I'll watch these comments on the replay also and be able to respond to any questions you guys have. So I'm John Nuzzolese from the Landlord Protection Agency, and thank you guys for tuning in. I'm going to go on now to the second essential clause that I feel is very essential. I've got 9 of them that I want to share, and there's a lot more very important ones, but I'd like to share this with you. I've got a early payment discount clause. It's an early